Hey Buford Middle School students, this is Mrs. Wilborn again, and welcome to Unit 4 of 7th grade math. And this unit is called Inferences and Statistics. And this is actually going to be a relatively short unit, so we're going to squeeze this in the next couple of weeks. And it should be fun. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we get going and reveal the Lesson 1 essential question, I want to just talk a second about an inference and a statistic to make sure that we understand those terms. So first off, an inference. An inference, and you could go ahead and jot this down as well on your guided notes, somewhere just kind of at the top. But an inference is basically an assumption, but it's an assumption that's based on facts. All right, so it's an assumption and it is based on facts. Okay, so an inference is an assumption. And then statistics, this is actually data. Okay, this is like hard data. This is the data that can either prove or disprove your inference. Okay, so it's almost like you make an inference, you make an assumption, and the statistics are what is going to prove or disprove. All right, so our statistics are just our data. And it's either going to support or not support our inference, the inference that we made. So you'll hear those terms a lot over the next course of the 3 units that we have, 3 lessons that we have. Okay, go ahead and get your guided notes out if you haven't already. And again, you'll need to make sure that you're in a quiet place, that you are free of distractions, no cell phones for texting, no headphones for listening to music, no little brothers or pets around. This should be a relatively short video, but we do need you to make sure that you're paying extra close attention because there are some vocabulary terms that you may not know. The essential question for this unit or this lesson is, in what ways are sample statistics related to the corresponding population parameters? So lots of different words in there that, sounds like a big jumbled mess, but we're going to hopefully help you understand that in the next slide or two. So again, in what ways are sample statistics related to the corresponding population parameters? We're going to come back to that question in just a little bit. Okay, as always, we're going to start off with some vocabulary terms. And it's really important here in this unit that you really understand your vocabulary. It might be a good idea to make some flashcards because the vocabulary is a big part of this unit. So grab your guided notes. You can go ahead and begin to fill in those vocabulary terms as I go ahead and start to point out some important things. All right, so the first term we have is data. All right, and data are facts or numbers that are collected. And basically data falls into 2 categories. We have categorical data, which is data that names a category or a name. For example, what month you were born, your favorite color, your favorite food, those types of things are categorical data because it puts you in a category. The second type of data is numerical data. And numerical data, this is all data that's a number. For example, how old you are, how tall you are, your shoe size, how much you weigh, those types of things put you in a numeric, can be numerical data because it puts you in a area based on your numbers, some information about you. Okay, the second term is survey, and survey is how we actually get our data. A lot of times it's how we get our data. And this is given to investigate behaviors or opinions by questioning a group of people. So a lot of times to find our data, we will produce a survey and then hand it to some individuals to take our survey. Next term is census, and a census is a survey of the entire population. All right, so if I, for example, wanted to find out something about all of the BMS students, all of the students at Buford Middle School, I would be conducting a census, okay, if I'm talking to all BMS students. Okay, the next word is population. And population is the group that you want to find information out about. So let's say, for an example, that I wanted to find out the average height of a 7th grade student at Buford Middle School. All right, well, I would go through my 7th grade students. So I wouldn't talk to all the students at BMS. I wouldn't be doing a census. I would specifically be talking to a population within that census. I would be talking to the group of 7th graders. Would do me no good to talk to 8th graders or 6th graders if I want to know the average height of a 7th grader. And then the last term on this slide is going to be population parameters. Okay, these are measured characteristics of a population. Okay, measured characteristics. So this is just what we want to find out about. So for example, it's the number, it's measured, so it's the number that represents the average shoe size of all 7th graders at BMS. So this is an example of a population parameter. The average height of 7th graders is also a population parameter. All right, so it's a characteristic that we can actually measure, and it deals with the population with whom we want to find out about. Okay, if I'm moving too quickly, of course, you should pause the video and make sure that you are jotting down all of these important terms. All right, last slide of vocabulary. I know this is a lot of vocabulary, but the next term is sample. And a sample is a group within a population that we actually examine in order to gather information. So again, if I wanted to find out the average height of a 7th grader at BMS, I would go to my population, which would be my 7th graders, and of that, it would be very difficult for me to survey or to measure all 7th graders. I mean, there's almost 300 of you. So what I would do instead is I would take a small group within the population, maybe your math class, and I would measure the students' heights of those students in your math class, and I would use that information as a representative of my population. Now, there's a couple ways that sampling can be done. The first one is simple random sampling. And this is when individuals from a population are basically chosen at random. All right, so kind of like I put everybody in 7th grade in a hat and I choose out names. Everybody has an equal chance to be part of the sample. That's random sampling or simple random sampling. That's one method. That is definitely the most reliable method. The second type of sampling we're going to talk about is convenience sampling. And this is choosing individuals that are easiest to reach. All right, so maybe what I would do is an example of convenience sampling would be going to one morning, getting here early, and Ms. Wilburn goes to the FCA meeting, and I pull all 7th graders from that meeting. All right, that would be convenience because the 7th graders are already there and it would be easy for me to do that. Now, that's not as accurate as random sampling. And then finally, a third way that we're going to talk about, there's more ways than these three of sampling, but the third way is volunteer sampling, volunteer response. And this is sampling when people themselves choose to respond. So it would almost be like if I put an advertisement on WinTV and I said, hey, I'm trying to find out the average height of all 7th graders. If you want to volunteer, come see me. And that would be those people who really felt strongly about wanting their height to be taken. The problem with this is that it's definitely not as accurate. All right, and the reason why is because people often volunteer if they have strong opinions or feelings about something. All right, 2 more terms. We're almost there, guys. Finally, second to last term is statistics. And a statistic is a measured characteristic of a sample. All right, so for example, the number that represents the average shoe size of all of our class, assuming that all students in our class are in 7th graders, or 7th graders at BMS. So again, if I were to go back to that shoe size question, and I went to a math class, and I took a shoe size, or the height for that matter, of all 7th graders in a math class, that would be a statistic because it was a measured characteristic of a sample. I didn't use a population, I used a sample. And then finally, bias is our last term. And bias is something that can occur when poor sampling methods are used. All right, and it can lead to misleading data about the population. So a bias is just something that can be inaccurate. It's something that if we don't sample purely or correctly, we can lead to false information about a population. All right, this lesson is heavy in vocabulary, so actually we're getting through this lesson. Let's move on. Again, if you're not done, then you will need to pause the video. All right, I just want to make one thing real important or stress real important concept here, and that is the concept between the census, the population, and the sample. All right, and so if you think of it like a bullseye, like a target, our census is going to be our outer ring. It is the thing that is the biggest. The census is the largest group. So if we were questioning the largest group, like all BMS students, we would be taking a census. Okay, something that is not done very often, and because it's such a large group. The United States does a census every 10 years. And so every 10 years they have ways that they question all Americans about certain things about them. And because it's such a daunting task, it only happens every 10 years. But that's how we get our population figures, that's how we get our ethnicity figures, and a whole bunch of other things. All right, within the census, or smaller than a census, would be a population. An example of a population would be the 7th grade. So it's a group within the census that I'm trying to possibly find information out about. All right, so at BMS, the 8th grade could be a population, 7th grade could be a population, and then 6th grade would also be a population. And then within that population, I could produce several samples, or I could produce sample groups. Sample groups would be like a math class or a language arts class. Okay, it's a small group from within the population. Now again, if I wanted to find something out about 7th graders at BMS, it would be difficult for me to survey all 7th graders. So I would take a small sample, or a sample of those 7th graders, and I would use that data that I got as a representative group. Okay, so let's go back to our EQ because I want to point out a couple things. Our EQ is, in what ways are sample statistics related to the corresponding parameters? All right, well, let's go through and just kind of break this down. Remember, a sample statistic, so this is one of those terms that we just went through, a couple of these terms that we just went through. A sample statistic, this is basically data from a smaller group. All right, a statistic is data, it's a measured characteristics, and a sample is data that we get from a small sample size or a sample group. So this is data from a smaller group. All right, so in what ways can data from a small group be related or correspond to a population parameter? Well, let's review what that is. Population parameters, these are characteristics that we're looking at within a large group. So again, if I was talking about 7th grade and I wanted to know the average height of the 7th grader, that would be my population parameter, my characteristic about my population parameter. What I would do is I would take data, or I would get statistics from a sample of those 7th graders. All right, so again, our EQ in this lesson is, in what ways are sample statistics related to the corresponding population parameter? All right, this is very, very important. I call this a VIC. It's a very important concept. And this is really the underlining theme of this lesson. And basically what you need to know is that sample statistics will be more accurate if sample size increases. All right, this is hugely important. So we talked about the different types of sampling, and if we sample properly, and if we sample with an appropriate amount of people, like our sample size, then our statistics, our data about that sample group will be more accurate. So in other words, the more people in our sample group, the statistics will better represent the population. If I just take a survey a small group, then my sample isn't going to be very accurate. My data isn't going to be very accurate. But the larger the sample group, then the more likely it's going to represent the entire population or the entire group. All right, let's take a second to put this all together. And we have this example question, and it says, for example, say you want to know the mean income of the subscribers to a particular magazine. Okay, this is a parameter of the population. We want to know the mean income. That's what we're trying to find here. The mean income. This is our population parameter. Okay, and that just means the average amount of money that they make. You draw a random sample of 100 subscribers and determine that their mean income is $27,500 a year. Okay, this is a statistic. The data is a statistic. We can conclude that the population mean income is likely to be close to $27,500 as well. This is an example of statistical inference. All right, so we want to find out the mean income of subscribers of a magazine. Well, we can't easily survey all the subscribers, okay? So we're going to get a sample group of those subscribers, and we're going to find out, we're going to survey them, and we're going to ask them, here's our sample group, it's 100 subscribers. We're going to ask them their mean income anonymously, and their mean income, we averaged all the incomes, and we got $27,500. Okay, this is our statistic. So what we can do is we can conclude, we can make an inference that the population mean, the whole group, all of the subscribers to the magazine, their mean income is likely to be close to $27,500 as well. All right, so that's kind of how the sample and the population all work together. Okay, we have two other examples that we're just going to quickly run through. All right, number one is, what inferences can you draw from the following example? Mrs. Adam wants to know the average amount of time it takes BMF students to reach school each morning. To find this out, she asked 20 students in each grade. How long does it usually take you to reach school in the morning? The average amount of time from the sample group is 12 minutes. All right, so hopefully what you can conclude, since Miss Adam took a sample, her sample was 20 students in each grade, so that means 60 students. She sampled 60 students, and the average time that it took them was about 12 minutes. So our conclusion, or our inference, could be that the average time it takes a Buford Middle School student to get to school is about 12 minutes. Since our sample group came up with 12 minutes, we can say that that represents our population. All right, now let's suppose Miss Adam decided to increase her sample size from 60 students to 150 students. How does that affect the statistic? Well, hopefully from our VIC, our very important concept, what you've learned is that as your sample size increases, so as we went from 60 students to 150 students, the time, or the amount of minutes, is going to be more accurate of our population. It's going to be closer to the actual amount of time, the actual average of our population. All right, finally, last little part here. What inference can you draw from the following example? You're trying to determine what pizza shop the people in your town like best. You and a friend spend 3 hours on a Saturday morning asking every 10th person that walks into Kroger. The results are clear that Vinnie's New York Pizza is the favorite. All right, so it wants to talk about, it's asking us about inferences. What inferences can we draw? And then it goes on to ask us about, is this survey fair? Why or why not? Well, let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, we're going to Kroger. We're going to survey and to sample people at Kroger. We go to Kroger for 3 hours on a Saturday morning, and we are going to survey those people to see what pizza shop they like the best. All right. First, I would suggest looking at this and saying, okay, well, what type of sampling are we using here? Well, it looks to me like it would be convenience sampling. And remember, if you go back to your vocabulary, convenience sampling is sampling that is chosen individuals that are easiest to reach. All right, so we're basically going to a place that's going to be fairly busy on a Saturday morning and easy to get people to answer our questions. Again, it wasn't random, which is the most accurate type of sampling. All right, so that's one thing that I would first point out there. The second thing that I think needs to be pointed out is that because of this type of sampling, our results may be skewed a little bit. It's not going to be accurate. All right, and so finally, the survey is going to ask us, is the survey fair? Why or why not? Well, I would say that there's definitely a possibility of having some bias in this survey. And the reason why is because, number one, we're using convenience sampling, and random sampling is definitely the most accurate way to get our statistics. Secondly, because we don't know much about this situation. Was it the Kroger that was close to New York Pizza, Vinny's New York Pizza? Was it the Kroger that was further away? The closer we are to Vinny's New York Pizza, you would think that those people live close to that area, and so they may not have tried some of the other pizza shops around. And so, although we can make some inferences here, okay, some assumptions, we don't know all the information. So, I would say that this survey is definitely has a little bit bias to it. Okay, now it's your turn. So what you're going to do is you have 2 questions left in your notes. Sorry, 4 questions. And what you need to do is read the information, and then you're going to determine if any biases occur. So you have to kind of read a little bit into those situations, make some inferences or some assumptions on your own, and then come up with a solution as to whether you think any biases occur. Your teacher will review those tomorrow with you in class. All right, guys, welcome back. We're glad to get started on Unit 4, and hopefully this will be a nice, easy unit between now and our next vacation. Take care, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.